Welcome back to Track Talk. This is week 5 of the 1830 League. We're going to start in Game A, which features MP Coin, Nate, King Zombie, and Zero Moon. MP Coin is undefeated thus far, so let's follow his progress and see how he does in his 5th week. The auction in this game is pretty unremarkable. We're just going to skip it and go into Stock Round 1. In stock round 1, we see a two-company float. King Zombie does steal the PRR, and then the C&O is also floated, but the other players are forced to just invest in these two companies, and we will see them both max float. So we'll skip into the the operating round. Zero Moon on the C&O is up and is going to lay a pretty standard track. PRR also laying towards the east as we would expect, and we're into stock round 2. Stock round 2, everyone just maintains the status quo, so we're back into the operating round with really no change in priority. Operating round, the C&O does get into Chicago, and the PRR is going to get into Lancaster. One thing that I'll note is the C&O did withhold. I think if you're in a 60-40 split pre-private buy, it makes a lot of sense to withhold since you're going to end up getting 100% of that revenue when you buy your privates, and you're denying your parasite investor any benefit from those shares. PRR does token and does buy the 2 train. We are into stock round 3. Finally, in stock round 3, we start having some exciting actions. We see both of the parasite investors sell out of their investments. The MP coin will take the NYNH, floats it pretty high, but I guess it doesn't matter because you're assuming that these two primary companies or first floated companies are both going to be sold down low. So the idea of floating behind them is just really not feasible, in which case maybe you just want a little bit of a bigger treasury. Nate P also selling out and will take the NYC. So NYNH and NYC float. We've seen this end in tragedy for the NYC in the past, where they get blocked and don't have a whole lot of options. We'll see how that develops. King Zombie is going to be able to take advantage of these cheap shares and just buys a paying C&O share. Zero Moon should be thinking the same, yeah. So just buying paying shares. The rest of the stock round is basically just these two companies floating. So we are into the operating round. We will see if NYNH decides to play friendly with the NYC or not. I have to say, when I'm in this situation, I almost always try and screw over the other player, which is what we'll see the NYNH do. I will say that this is, screwing over the NYC, sure, but it also is probably not great for the NYNH. I'd much rather have a run into Albany than into Providence, but I can't criticize it because I would do the same thing. NYNH buys the 2, NYC lays down towards the southwest. And I think that having been on both sides of this exchange, sitting in the NYNH chair versus sitting in the NYC chair, this is the way I tend to play the NYC position as well. You're guaranteed a run for 30 with a sharp curve into New Haven, and then you can upgrade and try and either get into New York if New York and New Haven upgrades there, or you can just head down into Reading and Allentown for late game runs. The alternative would be to head straight east into this $120 tile and try and get to Providence. I've seen plenty of people do that. I don't think it's unreasonable. Do have to be careful that it doesn't get double tokened by the B&M if it floats in the next stock round, which is a danger. But I think either of those are viable. It's just really your personal play preference. So Nate is going to go down south as we discussed and does buy a 2 train. PRR is heading towards Pittsburgh. Camden Amboy hasn't been bought in yet, obviously. And just looking at the trains, we do have a pretty easy access to the 3 train. Is anybody going to take advantage of that? Not the PRR. C&O is just paying as well. So we're into stock round 4. We're just going to skip in the interest of time. Everybody just buys paying shares. In operating round 4, the NYNH is actually going to be the first company to operate, and they are going to bite the bullet and buy in their privates. That is the Camden and Amboys, so pretty high incentive to buy that in. The NYC lays the sharp curve for the run, kind of expected, and also buys the 3 train. C&O links up with the south track laid by the PRR. I'm not going to token for now, and buys 2 3 trains, so pretty aggressive train buying from Zero Moon. Is going to buy his private, but it's a pretty low value one. And then the PRR upgrades to Lancaster, but I really am going to criticize this track lay, I think, multiple times in this video. You're giving access to the B&O, and you're cutting yourself off from running in Allentown. Is King Zombie in a position where he can float the B&O? Not at all. Last in priority, and really just not in a position where he should be expecting to get the B&O. So I think this is very problematic. Pays it out, buys the 3, buys his privates, and we're into stock round 5. Stock round 5, looking at the available companies. You got the B&O, always an option, especially when it gets a friendly Lancaster. And you got the B&M, which has the Providence pathway courtesy of the NYNH. Erie and CPR, of course, available, but much less desirable. So my personal preference would be the B&O if I'm in this situation, but we will see that Zero Moon disagrees and actually will be going for the B&M. So that leaves MP Coin with the B&O. We'll see. Nate could, in theory, sell shares to try and defend this. I think it would be very hard and costly to do that. But if you don't value the NYC because it doesn't have the greatest track right now, could potentially leave the NYC vulnerable to defend the B&O and then dare the other players to take the NYC over. Not an unreasonable course if you wanted to take that action. We won't see that happen though, and he's just going to buy paying shares. King Zombie is selling out and just doing some stock portfolio rearranging. There's a lot of intervening actions in this stock round. Eventually, we will see King Zombie, after trashing a little bit, go back and float the CPR, which is what we're seeing here. And, only had the CPR and the Erie to choose from. Neither of them is particularly attractive, but the CPR in particular is just notoriously bad company. It's not like King Zombie controls the Champlain and St. Lawrence. That's Zero Moon. So this is not going to be a safe suitcase. The Erie, in theory, is probably a safer suitcase, really, at least in the short term. But this is the decision he makes. So at this point, I think we basically just see him float that, and we're going to be into the next operating round. Right off the bat, we're going to see the B&O get into Lancaster. Real bad news for the C&O. And then the 2 trains are going to rust. A little added efficiency from MP Coin, able to use his 2 train to shuffle cash between his 2 companies. Nobody else is going to have that opportunity, which is to their detriment. CPR, attempted suitcase. We're going to see that's not going to last very long. NYNH has several options here. Could upgrade its home for the run. Could lay track for Providence. I probably would argue against that one. Or could, well, actually, I guess those are 2 options. But if it upgrades its home, can then try and get into Albany potentially. So we'll see what he decides. Does upgrade the home. Makes sense. Runs for 70. Pays it out. NYC says, you know what? I am a little miffed by the way that this track was laid. So I'm going to, instead of running into New York, head down to Reading and Allentown. And I think that's probably the right move. NYC is better value, obviously, but does a few extra bucks in this OR particularly matter? I don't know. And the long-term run into Reading and Allentown is probably going to be better. I think it's a different kind of mental calculus if Lancaster upgrades differently, and then you're potentially having competition for this track lay. But since you can guarantee getting that run, I think it's probably the right move. So doesn't cooperate with the NYNH, is paying back that tragic track from earlier, and will be heading towards Reading and Allentown. Runs for 30, pays it out. Pretty poor runs for the foreseeable future, but this is probably the better long-term decision. B&M, first move from them, upgrading their home, buys the 4. C&O lost out on Lancaster and is going to get a token in Pittsburgh. So this sets up a little bit of a competition between B&O and PRR to determine if someone wants to token there and cut the other person's run. Love to see it. Withholding. Does want to make sure they have permanent train money and are pretty darn close now with that withhold. PRR, trainless. I think we neglected to comment on the fact that he didn't have a train, or maybe he shuffled into the CPR, not entirely sure. But regardless, falling back trainless. Does have a full market, so that's particularly painful, right? Could have had 100% of the revenue, and now it gets 0 revenue instead. Upgrades Philly, and is tokening it. So is under a little competition, I guess, with from the B&O for that potential token spot. But it's always risky to upgrade or token Philly before it's upgraded because you have no guarantee that it goes into New York. So leaves himself $100 and does buy the 3 train, or $300 and buys the 4 train. Ignore me, I'm saying everything wrong. B&O, upgrading Baltimore, decent run, runs for 120. CPR, suitcase broken, heading towards Albany. If he can get a token there, we'll have some potentially decent runs, but no guarantees. NYNH does lay the Providence track, just has a 3 train or single 3 train. Probably doesn't need to token there, but does, and is going to run for 90, pays it. NYC gets into Reading and Allentown with the number 2 track. That was another feature that made this decision worthwhile. The fact that the number 2 was available. If that wasn't available, maybe you head towards New York North instead of towards New York South, even with the Lancaster being blocked. But the stars align for the NYC players, so he's actually able to get a pretty good run in the green phase. He tokens New York. I'm going to criticize that token, just like I criticized the Philly token. This is not going to be a blocker ever, basically. So really no rush to lay that. He still has permanent train money, so not the end of the world. B&M upgrades Providence. Don't have to token there, really. And doesn't. Okay. C&O getting into Baltimore for a little extra revenue in the short term. Reasonable. PRR looking to eventually get into Chicago potentially. And we are into stock round 6. Stock round 6, the major movement here is we're going to see an Erie float from Nate. So he's selling out, floating at 90. And we do have a single 4 train. So we're anticipating that this new company is going to buy the 4 and the 5. That means that if you're one of these other players, you want to operate pretty close in operating order after the Erie to make sure you can snag one of those 5s, if not both of them. So if you're one of these players, you probably want to change up operating order a little bit to make sure you can do it. But actually, we won't see anybody doing anything of interest, and actually it's just a pretty straight up float of the Erie. So we'll just skip here and into the operating round. The Erie, as expected, lays itself track and does buy the 4 and the 5. This gives the B&O access to Brown, and no surprises, upgrades the Philly track so that the PRR token is wasted. Do have to watch out for a token or who tokens here. New York could have a token here and get into Baltimore, cut the B&O run into New York. And I think this is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of this New York token. It's your cheap token. You could drop it here and get a great run. Now you may have to drop a more expensive token or even lose out on the ability. So a little bit inefficient. MP Coin, though, on the B&O is going to token in Pittsburgh. So that gives the NYC a little breath of air. Doesn't have to worry about a token here. We'll be able to get into Baltimore, at least until the CPR comes down and starts fighting for some of this track as well. Bad news for the PRR. Loses access to New York and has been cut at Pittsburgh. So the PRR is in bad shape. B&O withholding, now that permanent trains are available, just sitting on a 4 train, reasonable. CPR, heading over to Albany. This is potentially problematic for the NYC, just because you don't know where these tokens are going to end up, and you previously had basically unrestricted access to New York. NYC, upgrading New York, and has exactly enough for a 5 train, doesn't have the money for a token without withholding, pays it, and we do see the 5 train. NYNH, upgrading Boston, and will withhold for the 5. So Zero Moon has missed out on the 5s, but is going to do a little trick here, shuffle a train out of the C&O, and he's going to bring out the 6 on the C&O in just a moment. PRR still with a full market, so very efficient for him to pay. and is going to be missing out on permanent transfer right now, but does also take a page from Zero Moon's book and shuffle trains in the CPR, leaving the CPR with near enough money for a 6. So expect to see Zombie Emergency buying a 6 in the CPR. CNO, as noted, with more than enough cash for the 6 train and is going to buy that. CPR now gets into Albany, drops a cheap token in Albany. Could have taken the Philly token, but is worried about the B&M token cutting his runs. So I think this is probably the safer move. Unfortunately, as we'll see, it's not going to pay out for him. But I think he was probably forced to drop the token there. He does emergency by the 6, so we are just waiting now for the D train to come out, and looking at the game state, no one is in a obvious position to make it happen, so it's going to be a little bit of a stall until someone is able to get that D train, which is good news for everybody with 4 trains. Nate is the only player with 3 trains, but he doesn't really have great routes in the Erie, so needs to shuffle that train into another company, the NYC potentially, for those runs. Probably could have finagled a way to do that in the last operating round, but missed the opportunity. So that's going to be a little wasted opportunity, or lost opportunity, I guess I should say. And the Erie actually is suitcasing, it looks like. Yeah, so definitely wants to get that train into the NYC as soon as possible. Upgrades Albany and is going to run for just 190. Doesn't buy a train out. So yeah, I think missing some revenue there. B&M, this is what I was talking about, has $41, sees that he's tokened out at Albany and says, well, that's fine. I will then token in New York. So doesn't cut the CPR run that much, still able to hit New York. Could potentially argue that a Philly token would be worthwhile, but you do leave yourself open to the potential token in CPR in New York South in the future, which would then cut your runs. So I think, as much as I hate New York tokens, I think in this situation it's probably it's the move. So he runs for 180, pays it. B&O sitting on a single 4 train. No tokens, does upgrade to get into New York, and we'll see what happens with this Philly token, if that's left open for him or not. He's withholding, front runner for that D train upgrade. NYNH, not entirely clear where he's heading, maybe just hoping to block or bypass Albany. Runs for 5 and pays it out. PRR, just getting a run into New York South. Does have token available. Doesn't have the money for it just yet, but pretty close. CNO running that shiny new 6 train. And he's going to pay out with 90% of that revenue. We're into stock round 7. Stock round, we're going to basically skip. Basically, the player with the most cash, Zero Moon, is going to build a little bit of a share lead here. And since we are on the brink of the D trains, all the players need to be a little bit careful about where they invest their money, not leaving themselves open for a potential dump. So let's just skip this stock round and just look at the share distribution. Zero Moon, as noted, has a slight lead. King Zombie is actually keeping pretty close to him. And when we look at the operating order and where people have invested their cash, both Zombie and Zero are potentially vulnerable to dumps. So they need to, hope that doesn't come to pass. We are into the operating round. And there is some track development, but it's mostly at this point watching who is going to get the D train upgrade. So we're going to move pretty quickly here. Erie is going to give itself a run. Still sitting on 2 trains with 1 run. Would have really liked to see the NYC buy that train over, as I kind of have been commenting. NYNH, working on that Albany bypass that we've discussed. B&M going to help them out. Neither of these companies can secure their runs, and the B&M in particular needs to be a little bit careful that he doesn't get his run cut in Providence, although really, I guess he's running to New York South anyways, so doesn't care all that much. B&M's withholding, PRR, upgrading Lancaster, it looks like. CNO, heading over to these double O's, or potentially hoping to get into Rochester and take advantage of this run into New York North. Runs for 210. B&M, or sorry, B&O, $400, and is still withholding. So I think they are our favorite to get the D train and has put themselves into yellow. So although MP Coin is lagging in shares, may be able to exceed his cert limit much more than the other players, as he's the only player with a yellow company. So expect the D train to come out in the next operating round. Could see someone get tricky and try and shuffle and then put some president cash into it to deny the upgrade to MP Coin, but we'll move through quickly and just see how that develops. CPR has a decent run even with the token out of New York South, running for 250. He is withholding, but not going to be in time to beat the other players for that D train. Looks like Erie is establishing a little bit of a better run for itself, but still pretty lackluster. NYNH, we see multiple players still trying to get over into the double O's. B&M going to cooperate with that, and we do see the Eastern companies now with access to Buffalo. B&M also withholding. We saw Zero Moon shuffle in the past to bring out the 6 train, but it looks like he's just going to be content to withhold and then emergency buy the D in the next operating round. PRR still laying kind of random track. This company has been pretty cut up in terms of their runs. CNO, not entirely sure where that track is destined, but he does secure a token in Providence. I don't know that this token is all that important. Doesn't really cut anybody's runs, and the way the tokens are, or the way the track is developing, it looks like the map is going to be kind of open for some big runs for everyone. CNO does withhold, so I think withheld on the B&M and the CNO, but didn't shuffle, so we'll have to wait for the D train. B&O, on the other hand, is going to withhold again and get the D train upgrade. So last rank of trains is out, and that has been painful for MP Coin. He is falling a little bit behind because of the withholding on the B&O, but the B&O run is not too shabby, and he's now put 2 other players into train trouble. So the lead that they've developed on him is pretty small, and they are going to lose that lead when they buy their D trains here. Just looking at the B&O run, he does have access into New York South and Baltimore up into the double O's for now. There are a lot of players with tokens still. The Erie, the NYC, all these companies, I guess with the exception of the PRR, have access to that track and could potentially start laying tokens to cut his runs. But even with runs or tokens being laid around the double O's, this track is all pretty secure. So he's going to have a decent run for his D train, regardless of what the other players decide to do with their tokens. Last OR in this set, we will see 2 more D train purchases. NYC, looking to avoid a token out situation in Rochester, it looks like. Pays it. NYNH, cooperating, and this Rochester bypass is basically assured now. Erie is going to lay his double O and then drops a token right next to his other token. Very underwhelming token. Really doesn't cut anybody's runs, but he's unable to double token in Dunkirk. So even though that would be the preferable location, just takes the little bit of security from tokening just north of his home token. CPR trainless completes the link up and bypass of Rochester, and will sell pretty heavily for the D train. PRR running the only track he's got for 240, and B&M, last company to need a D train, is actually going to shuffle just to combine the cash in the 2 companies and buys the D train in the CNO. Is the CNO run that much better than the B&Ms? I guess it's probably marginally better. I would have to sit down and do the math, but probably pretty similar between the 2 companies. B&O, first company to actually run a D train, and is running pretty darn well, 370. pays it out. We're into stock round 8. If we evaluate the game state here, we'll see that Nate is kind of narrowly in the lead over MP Coin, but does trail in shares. Also has lower revenues and no D train. So the fact that this game is going to go late with a pretty open map probably means that MP Coin is favored, although it will be close. Zero is also a potential contender. He does lead in shares. Isn't that far behind in net worth, I guess. He is pretty far behind. The CNO run could be decent. We were talking about that. So would have to monitor that really as well. So we'll skip through this stock round and just see where the share lead ends up. It looks like MP Coin has managed to exceed the share limit and also come out with the most shares. So with that, I think that he is in the driver's seat of this game. And we'll just look at the revenues. I don't think we need to monitor the track that much. The way the tokens have evolved and the fact that this 00 was laid to run back into the east rather than expand to the west in this track kind of means that there's not a whole lot of track development left to talk about. So I think we can just mostly pay attention to revenues here. We see that the track is not changing all that much. So we'll go to the spreadsheet and see that MP Coin is running for the most, and he is in close competition with Nate, but with running for $100 or $150 more, should be able to overcome his deficit. So let's just keep monitoring that. Looking at the spreadsheets here, MP Coin has remained fairly comfortably gaining and is now in first place. We did see some withholding from the CPR, which is King Zombie's company, but he is so far behind. I don't think that's going to change things up. The one liability for MP Coin here is that he is entering the stock round last. So there are multiple players that are going to have to sell shares. MP Coin is going to be getting the least value for his shares. And he also is in a position to have to sell the most shares out of everybody else. So that is a way potentially he could lose this game. We'll just skip the stock round, look back at the stock lead, and see that all the players now have equal share leads, but MP Coin probably has the best revenue still in the B&O. So even though it is very close between Nate and MP Coin, Nate actually was able to eclipse MP Coin's net worth in that stock round as a result of selling first. But it's going to be more of the same where MP Coin's revenue is just a teeny bit little higher, and he's actually already ahead after this first stock round or operating round. So we'll just call the game here. We don't need to get into the minutia. MP Coin takes this game with a very narrow victory over Nate, and it just comes down to the map opening up, but MP Coin's D train running just a little bit better than everybody else's. MP Coin now has won 4 games of the 5 weeks he's played. The only week he's not won, he didn't play at all. So he's undefeated. Very impressive and cool to see. I hope that we see a extended streak here. Even if you kind of naively assume that everybody has a 25% chance of winning in a 4-player game, you start multiplying that chance out over 4 or 5 games, it gets pretty unlikely that you're going to see someone go undefeated. So this is impressive. We'll continue to monitor his progress. With that said, let's jump into Game B. In Game B, we will look at the auction just very briefly. It's notable that we get into a position where Too Many Revenants is given the opportunity to pull and get a pretty close to face value Mohawk and Hudson, which is a hard thing to pass up. So we will see him do that. I will note that it gives the HDM Quilter a pretty close to face value D&H, so that's good for her as well. No surprise that he pulls there. Really pretty good opportunity. The other interesting thing is that we see the Champlain and St. Lawrence go for a very high value. A. Murphy and HDM Quilter are fighting for this, and it's kind of odd because HDM Quilter is safe from the B&O, so really has no reason to bid it up as much as she does. But she'll ultimately take it for $75, which is much more than you usually see. This leaves A. Murphy and Cottongrass to fight it out for the Camden and Amboy, um, and eventually it looks like A. Murphy wins it, which will leave Cottongrass to fall in the B&O. A. Murphy was left enough money to potentially float the PRR if they get the opportunity, but they don't have priority. So whether or not that actually happens remains to be seen. Cottongrass pars the B&O for Max. HGM Quilter is going to take the C&O and leave the PRR for A. Murphy. Um, a lot of players will deny the PRR player that. I don't think it's the end of the world to give it to them. Someone is eventually going to float that, and when the company floats, they can sell the share and then get a float that way. So not really too big of a difference. The one thing that I do criticize is A. Murphy floated the PRR pretty high. You really want to buy in your CNA private, and by floating high, you're going to be going early in priority, early in operating order, and have a less likely chance of doing that. The rest of the stock round isn't all that interesting, but we will see Cottongrass buying up her B&O. Isn't able to float it, of course, but with the private revenue, we'll float it in stock round 2. The only risky thing here is that she goes back and buys a C&O share. So you only have $10 of leeway to float the B&O. If this C&O falls back, which is guaranteed to do, and then gets sold down, you could potentially lose the ability to float your B&O that you've worked so hard to buy. This is not going to pay, so there's really no reason to buy this share. PRR heads east, buys a 2 train. C&O heads west. NYNH heads towards the B&M, all very kind of expected stuff. The only surprising thing here is that Revenance is going to buy 3 2 trains, so really committing to this Providence run in the early game revenue. We'll see how that works out for him. If you're the other players, you should be looking for these NYNH shares here because the revenue is going to be by far the highest in the game. Cottongrass doesn't have to worry about the sale of the C&O and sells a share for a $2 loss and does buy the B&O. So worked out fine and was not really that high risk. I just don't really know what the motivation for buying that share was. Looks like everybody else is going to be mostly passing. Too many Revenants. The one player that has cash and cannot buy any more of the NYNH, so goes for the C&O instead. Very reasonable. We are into, actually, sorry, not the only player with cash. We see HGM Quilter sitting on cash. Doesn't buy in the NYNH shares. Probably should have picked up at least one of them. Into operating round 2. We're going to see the B&O head south, and they will pick up the last 2 and a 3. It is a little bit painful as the B&O player to break into the 3s for the other players, but if you don't, you do run the risk of falling back when the 4 train comes out if there's an aggressive rush on the 3 trains. That said, the B&O floats so high, it's going to be hard for someone to operate ahead of you in OR3 and rush your 2 train before you can run. So not a huge risk, but I do understand why you'd want to buy a 3 train. PRR heads towards Lancaster, is going to drop the token, buys the CNA, which is all very reasonable. Neglects to buy a 3 train, which is a little bit less reasonable. NYNH, no surprises here, drops the token in Providence, runs for 110, and is going to buy a 3 to save themselves from falling back. The danger here is that you only get to run that high revenue one time. We'll see if that comes to pass. If those 4 trains come out, you're going to be a pretty sad NYNH. C&O buys the CSTL and DNH and is going to get into Chicago for pretty good revenue, also secures the 3. So not a whole lot of 3 trains left. If you're the NYNH player, you got to hope for a little bit of a stall. Otherwise, this expensive 2 train strategy is going to backfire. SR3, we're going to see some sloppy stuff here. HJM is selling at it for C&O, reasonable, and takes the B&M. B&M is going to be a pretty attractive choice here because the NYNH's track has already been laid. So very reasonable. A. Murphy is going to par the CPR for very high, doesn't have the cash to float it. Unclear to me what the rationale is there. You occasionally want to reserve a presidency, but the CPR is a bad company. You don't control the Champlain and St. Lawrence, and you don't have enough money to float it. So questionable. Too Many Revenants, similar story here, is going to max par the NYC to reserve the presidency, but really is going to struggle to float that. I love the synergy between the NYC and the NYNH, but the NYNH has laid towards the B&M, so that synergy is a little bit neutered. The rest of the stock round is unexciting. We'll just see that B&M float. So we'll move into the operating round. B&M is the newly floated company and is first to operate, upgrades its home, and then sets up for pretty good revenue with 2 3-train buys. And you'd kind of expect the B&O to buy a 4 here and rust everybody's 2s. 3 and a 4, not unreasonable, and has pretty decent revenue potential in the next operating round with those trains, but is going to be content with just the 3 and the 2. Pays it out and lets the PRR player run their 2 train without falling back. So I think that's too passive. A. Murphy gets the Philadelphia upgrade, but immediately blocks themselves from ever running into New York South. So that's a kind of unforced error there. Even Tokens Philadelphia. Again, this is never going to run into New York. It's really not a high yield token. So that's a lot of wasted money. NYNH gets a little bit of a breath of fresh air, is going to able to run its 2 trains for at least another OR, which is something that probably they couldn't have expected, but it's really a big boon for them. So it has really good revenue. 180 pays it out. C&O, last company to operate, is going to lay the number 2 track and runs for 110 and breaks the CPR suitcase. B&O, second chance here to buy a 4 train and is going to decline to do so. B&M with good track and 2 3 trains, expect him to see a token in Providence to run that, and does for 190, pays it out. Murphy laying into Pittsburgh, still no train other than that 2 train, and not going to withhold or make any preparations for that train rusting. NYNH still running 3 trains. This is much longer than you would anticipate usually, and they have the NYC presidency reserved, so going to start laying track for that. Pays out for 200. This 2-train gambit has really paid off for them quite well. C&O teleports over to Scranton and should be able to get the Reading and Allentown run into New York, which is pretty nice. So running for 110 and is going to pay that. We're into stock round 4. Stock round 4 is also a little bit interesting. We will see A. Murphy working on floating the CPR, but Too Many Revenants is going to get kind of greedy here and actually max pars the Erie. So has 2 unfloated companies, neither of which he can really afford to float on his own, both of which are vulnerable for attack by other players. And this is $400 of $1,000 net worth locked up in worthless shares as it stands. So very aggressive. We'll see how that works out. Cottongrass is going to start to work on the NYC, hoping to steal that, I'm sure. Really doesn't have the liquidity to be a serious threat. So this may end up just helping Too Many Revenants. HDM Quilter is going to ignore that and just buy paying shares. A. Murphy has floated the CPR. Too Many Revenants says thanks for the help, Cottongrass, and the NYC is almost floated. HDM Quilter still just going for paying shares. A. Murphy out of cash, out of the stock round. NYC has now floated. Cottongrass is going to sell the B&O to try and pressure still, but this is bound for failure. Too Many Revenants does have to sell paying NYNH shares, which I think is painful for them, especially when they had such high revenue, although their revenue is going to be much lower now that we have multiple companies floating to bring out that 4 train. Does get 50% of the NYC, so safe there. Cottongrass going to buy paying share and is apparently just happy to sit on the, oh no, it does sell out of the NYC. Okay, I think it would have been risky to hold those shares. Buying paying shares in the C&O now. So we will see one of Too Many Revenants companies float, but he still has $200 just locked up in the Erie doing nothing. CPR, new company, does have a run. Didn't really have to have that run. If the Champlain and St. Lawrence had laid a sharp turn instead of this gentle, could have left them with no option. for an off-board run, but wasn't that mean. We will see the 4 train finally come out. That should have definitely happened last operating round. So bad news for the PRR, but hard to sympathize that much when they had so many opportunities to avoid this. CPR actually buys 2 4 trains, okay. HJM Quilter, unaffected by the rust, is going to have $190 of revenue. B&O gets into Lancaster. Lancaster is really not that exciting here because you're assuming that they're not going to get into Reading and Allentown. They've already tokened in Philadelphia and killed the run through Philadelphia. So, although usually I'm a big fan of tokens in Lancaster, in this game I think you're probably better heading west and trying to get into Chicago as the B&O. Runs for 100, pays it out. NYC first operation. We saw this last week too. Doesn't have a yellow city to lay track. So I criticized King Zombie for this last week because I neglected to realize that they didn't have track to lay, but we're seeing it again this week, which is a little bit unusual. NYNH, just laying track, I guess, to help the NYC in the future. PRR Trainless is in a little bit of a rough position. It's going to lay track to link up with the C&O. And is left in a position where they're either going to have to emergency buy the 4 train and open up 5s for other players, or shuffle a train out of their CPR. So I think that's why we saw the CPR buy 2 4 trains at the start of the operating round. C&O, instead of laying the track with Scranton, is actually going to upgrade Lancaster, and we will see a token there. I think that's probably overkill. You already have access to Reading and Allentown and a token in Scranton. You really don't need a token in Lancaster. This token gets you nothing that the Scranton token that you paid $120 for doesn't already get you. So a lot of money on tokens that could have been spared. HJM running the B&M still for 190. Happy as a clam. B&O upgrading Washington and running for just 110, withholding and just shy of the 4 and 5 train purchase, but could get there in the next operating round if nothing changes. CPR running for 70, pays it out. NYC does have track to lay now and gets an immediate run into New York, so not the end of the world that it wasn't able to lay its home last time since it still had the train. Also going to be just shy of the 4 and 5 train, it looks like. With a withhold, probably could have done that. Although discarding a 4 train is not very attractive. NYNH, upgrading Albany in paying. PRR is given the Reading and Allentown upgrade or track lay despite the C&O teleporting over to Scranton. So this is something that should not have been allowed. Tokens in New York. So wasted a token in Philly, now wasted a token in New York. Out of tokens as a result. Withholds 150, and we are into the C&O. C&O is going to upgrade Scranton, and really Scranton missed an opportunity. Not a very attractive location at this point. Stock round 5. We'll just skip this in the interest of time. Nothing happens and the Erie doesn't float. We're back into the operating round. And we commented in the last operating round how players were getting close to buying the 4 and the 5. We will eventually see that here. B&M laying some expensive track, has really massive revenue and permanent train money now. CPR going to pay money to start heading west. Pretty miserable runs up there. B&O is just $50 shy of the 4 and 5, and we will see them withhold for it. So we are into the brown phase. NYNH immediately going to upgrade his home. Runs for 160 and going to shuffle a train out of the NYC in order to snag both 5 trains. So the NYC is a powerhouse here. 2 5 trains, great track, can run from Boston into New York and then run into New York South and into Lancaster. Does need to make sure it either tokens in Philly or potentially in New York, just to make sure that its runs are never cut. But there's not that much urgency to do that, honestly, because the C&O has thrown away tokens and is out of tokens. The PRR has wasted 2 tokens. So neither company is in position to cut their runs. B&M and the NYNH, I won't say they threw away their tokens. There was good reason to token where they did, but they are also out of tokens. So NYC is looking real good here. Lancaster's upgraded, running for 140 with holding. HM Quilter realizing that the 6 train is sitting on the corner, and she has three trains between her two companies, 2 in the B&M and 1 in the C&O. So potentially dangerous situation for her. PRR running for 180 and withholds, so inching towards that 6 train money as well. CPR gonna be improving their runs finally, but also doesn't have permanent train. And we see that the B&M is positioned to buy that 6. So we will see that come out. Does need a second permanent train in her second company, but we'll see how she manages that. NYNH upgrading Albany out of tokens. Also needs a permanent train, but has an extra 5 in the NYC, so too many revenants, actually pretty safe. B&M, really not great track for the B&M. Needs to find a way into Chicago probably for a better run, but does have 2 trains, so at least for the short term, the revenue is going to be decent. We'll see the monstrous run from this NYC running for 410 with 2 5 trains. That's not going to last forever because he's going to have to eventually shuffle a train at the NYNH, but for the time being, that's really nice. C&O trainless, and this is HEM Quilter's other company. She rusted her 3 trains, but is able to pick up the second 6 with an emergency buy, so has survived the train rush. And then the PRR upgrading Pittsburgh, and is going to withhold, getting pretty close to the D train upgrade. And the CPR is also going to need a D train, so this is potentially dangerous for A. Murphy. We've been talking about this Erie float for a while, hasn't come to pass, but now that the D trains are facing, too many revenants may want to think about that. And if A. Murphy is forced to buy 2 D trains, would bankrupt. But A. Murphy has an escape valve here. Got, I guess, a fortunate break here in terms of priority, and is able to consolidate all of her cash into the CPR, and then we'll see her dump the PRR on Cottongrass. So even though A. Murphy was on the chopping block, it's going to be Cottongrass with the train liability here. Cottongrass also potentially at risk of bankruptcy, only $800 of liquidity, and is going to need a D train by the end of the first operating round. Either the Erie or the CPR should be bringing that out without fail. The only saving grace for Cottongrass here is that they do have a permanent train in the B&O, which is going to get a run before she's forced to buy the D. So may get lucky, but it's going to be razor thin. Now that we've seen the dump, we're going to skip the rest of the stock round, and I will point out that even though we're facing the D train, Erie still doesn't float. The NYC has a pretty good run for a D train, so I'm anticipating that eventually the NYC is going to shuffle a 5 train into the NYNH. The Erie buys a D train and probably needs to get that D train into the NYC to take advantage of this double New York run that he's built for himself. But for now, it looks like it's going to be the CPR's responsibility to bring out the D. So NYNH, no permanent train yet. Going to pay it out. Knows that he's safe and has a 5 train from the NYC. No concerns there. B&M is not entirely sure where they're heading. Maybe hoping to set up for a bypass of Albany for the future. Paying it out. CPR does get the D, but this is not a good D run. So this is why the CPR is such a bad company. Even with good trains, you got no options really. B&O has a permanent train and is going to run for just 190, pays it out. NYC starting to head over to the Erie track potentially. Alternatively, could be heading towards Pittsburgh. A token in Pittsburgh would be pretty good too. I don't know. The NYC probably doesn't need that actually. Its run is already pretty monstrous. Probably needs to head up north and loop back into Albany so that it has an easier way of running from Lancaster to Providence with a double New York tap. Runs for 260 C&O. Grabs the token in Scranton. Oh no, that was the teleport token. So no new token, just running. It's 6 train, has decent revenue, 240. PRR, trainless. We talked about this dump earlier, and this is the moment of truth. Is Cotton Grass going to bankrupt here? Has to sell down very heavily, and looks like they survive with $70. So the bad news here is that Cotton Grass had to put her company into brown, and with 2 operations left, there's no way to leave brown. So she's guaranteed to lose this company that she just had to finance a D train for. I've been in this situation from at least once, and there's basically no worse feeling in 18xx than having to buy someone else a D train. NYNH heading over towards Rochester. CPR links up with the offboard, so D train's running for 160. That's pretty painful. B&M running the 6, probably still just working on an Albany bypass for the future. Otherwise, unclear where they're heading. NYC links up with Pittsburgh, does have the money for a token, is not going to lay it for now. B&O looking to get into Chicago. C&O, and actually the B&O is going to shuffle the D train out of the PRR. I think that's probably the good move. Cotton Grass is guaranteed to lose the PRR if anybody wants to take it. So taking the D train out of the PRR makes sense. You're still going to lose a train, but at least you won't lose the D. You'll lose a 5 train instead. C&O completing the link up with Rochester. PRR is going to be forced to buy the train out of the B&O. No surprises there. And we see players setting up for runs for the Erie potentially. B&M does lay the Erie home. CPR going to lay a pretty useless token in Ottawa. You need that cash for track to head down south. So even though it's getting kind of late in the game, the tokens still are important. NYC running for 260, paying it, and B&O does get into Chicago, runs for just 230 though, so still pretty poor D runs. C&O, PRR, last company to run, and is going to pay, but we will see it immediately stolen by HJM Quilter. So if we're talking about key moments in the game, this is one of them. Getting a free permanent train is never bad. The rest of the stock round, we're just going to see the Erie float, and then this game is going to come down to Too Many Revenants and HJM Quilter. A. Murphy has terrible runs in the CPR. Cotton Grass has been eliminated by the D rusting event. So it's between Too Many Revenants and HJM Quilter. They both have a ton of cash. They're both going to try and exceed their cert limit, and we'll see which of them is successful here. So we're going to skip the stock round. Just look here. HJM Quilter at 24, Too Many Revenants at 21, and 5 of these shares are not paying for at least one of these stock rounds. So even though Too Many Revenants has a $500 lead, it's actually not really looking great for them. B&M or HM Quilter has decent runs in all of our companies. It's going to be hard to cut those runs. They aren't amazing by any meaning of the word, but even the D trains are not running for anything amazing. So it's just kind of a low revenue game state. So the track here is somewhat important, I suppose. We're going to see what the Erie does at least, but I think we can start moving pretty quickly through these operating rounds. CPR, I will note, is withholding, and they have to withhold because they can't afford to lay any of the important track, this 00 or this track here, to try and get into New York, and that's a function of them dropping this token. If they don't drop that token, they can upgrade this, run out of Montreal down south, and have much better runs than what they have now. Erie's operation here, they token Dunkirk. They're forced to token there, so no surprises. And they will buy a D train out of pocket. They do have tokens, but it's going to take them a withhold to drop it. So, assuming that we're right and that this game comes down to Too Many Revenants and HDM Quilter, I think that Too Many Revenants should be looking for ways to cut HDM Quilter's runs up. Really not going to be able to cut the PRR run too much. Token in Pittsburgh, I guess, is potentially, you know, something you could think about, but the PRR already has access into New York, and there's really nothing that you can do about it. C&O with the token in Scranton has access to New York as well. Um, so token in Pittsburgh is probably not going to cut it. I suppose a token in Albany you could think about, but that's already been bypassed. HEM Quilter did a good job of foreseeing a token liability here. So really, there's not too many options for Too Many Revenants to hurt her. She has small trains, so the runs are hard to really damage. B&O is probably looking to get into New York North. This is something that the other players could look to block. And by the other players, I'm specifically thinking HDM Quilter because you look at the revenue distribution here, and Revenants has got 30% of it. HDM Quilter's only got 1% of it, or sorry, 10% of it. So she needs to, think of the B&O as an enemy company. B&O, regardless, still just running for 230. Too many Revenants. Not sure where they're heading with that. Runs for 260. C&O. So this is an example of a time where this run probably should be cut. But instead, they're going to start working on getting the CPR down south. PRR, another opportunity for HDM Quilter to block the B&O here, and going to neglect to do that. NYNH is not blocking the B&O, but not getting it into New York. Probably because that track doesn't exist. Needs a track like this to get them the run. And, well, really, there should be tracks. So I think that's maybe a missed opportunity from Too Many Revenants. You're highly invested in that company. You want it to run well. I think that we can start skipping through operating rounds pretty quickly here. We do see the CPR get down south, and this was something that should have been blocked by the other players probably. But the CPR doesn't have money. It does have money actually for a token. So that could potentially change things up. We'll see if they elect to drop it here in this operating round. Let's look at the map. The token out here. It does look like a big loop is going to be created, but I don't know that that's a very high yield token location. Yeah, all right. So let's look at the spreadsheet here. A Murphy at 500 is making a little bit more than Cotton Grass, but those two players have been eliminated. And then it's neck and neck between Too Many Revenants and HDM Quilter. Their revenue is very similar. HDM Quilter is very narrowly in the lead. So they both are at their share limit, and they will, have the opportunity to do some adjusting of their stock portfolio here. But HDM Quilter is heavily advantaged. And again, this really comes back to the PRR steal. She's got a yellow company nobody else does as a result of stealing it from Cotton Grass. So this stock round will just basically boil down to people optimizing their portfolios. We don't have to watch that. And then the operating round, we do eventually see this big loop created around the map. The map is so open for all these players that it really doesn't matter what track develops. So we can basically just look at the revenues in the spreadsheet, and we see that Too Many Revenants and HDM Quilter are both kind of running for, very similar amounts. Too Many Revenants pulls ahead a little bit in 8.2, but the net worth difference is so close that it's very hard to call a winner. We just skip to the end and we see that actually HDM Quilter wins by $1. So extremely close game. I think this key moment of this game is really the PRR being, sold down. So I'm sure that you could go through this game in detail and find, numerous examples where one player could have run for, $10 more, or, a very slight difference in the stock order of sale would change the outcome. When it comes down to a dollar difference, it's basically a tie. Um, but HGM Quilter technically does win. So congratulations. That brings us to Game C. And Game C, I'm just going to say it is a mess. We get off to a real rough start in the auction, and we're going to see first action of the game a bid on the B&O. B&O is not a good private, so that is not good. We then see a actual bid war for the B&O, and we'll see JTT and Submunch fighting for the B&O for some reason. Um, and it gets worse. We see the CNA going for a very high value, gets bid up to 265, and the player that's bidding up is already owning this Delaware and Hudson, so massively over privatized. Really no threat of running the B&O, so the CNA shouldn't really be going for that much. Um, and we just see kind of a mess from the start here. Because of the crazy auction, the PRR player can't float, but they par the PRR anyways. Um, and it's going to be a while before they can float, even with their private revenue, unless they get some help. Submunch is going to be working on parring or floating the B&O um, for themselves, and it's going to rust their own private. And then JTT has the head scratcher here of floating the NY&H way too high. Not going to be able to float that either. So we've got basically a two-company start here. CNO and the B&O are going to be the only companies that are able to run. I think we've seen the NY&H player make this mistake before, where they just lock up all their cash and basically have a terrible early experience in the game. B&O running down south, and we'll buy two trains. CNO heading towards Chicago, nothing too surprising there. We'll just skip stock round 2 since we still got 2 players that aren't able to float and go into operating round 2. B&O makes the decision to head aggressively into Philadelphia. You don't see this gentle turn too often. It's heavily dependent on the Philadelphia tile being upgraded in a manner that works out for you. And almost certainly the PRR player is going to stop that since they can't ever access Philadelphia with the city token oriented this way. So I don't dislike it, I guess. You've got the PRR player floating so late that the B&O should have a lot of tempo, but they don't control the CNA private, so this is not guaranteed to work out for you. It does have two trains, and it's going to run those for 100. CNO heads over to Chicago and buys a second 2 train, but is unable to break into their privates. SR3, we will finally see the PRR float, and then for some reason, Submunch floats the NY&H. I can't really explain that. One thing I neglected to point out is that JTT actually exchanged their M&H for a NYC share, so lost the private revenue there and has a share that is literally worthless. Like it literally does not have a value because the company hasn't been floated. So maybe this was an effort to get a share that could be sold to then float the NY&H, but didn't realize that you can't sell a share in a company that hasn't floated. I'm not sure. But that would have been a really painful start for JTT since they were just sitting on $10 of revenue. Would have had to wait like 4 more operating rounds to float the NY&H, but gets bailed out by Submunch. I'm not sure. I think that's probably just someone feeling bad for JTT. There's not really a reason to do that otherwise. Elite DAC is going to be sitting on cash. Heart of Dior floats the PRR, and we are into the operating round. Still in yellow track, so B&O doesn't have any track to lay, runs for 100, pays it out. NY&H is going to head towards the NYC home. JTT does have a share in the NYC, so in theory, when that company floats, was hoping to get some value from that, I assume. NY&H is going to buy a 2 train, not going to press for the 3s. PRR also buying a single two train, not going to press for her buying either, which is hard to explain because it's just $180 and then you get $320 from your private buy-in. The only reason not to do that is because she can't get over to Philadelphia and Trenton yet. So by buying her private in now would give the B&O access into Philadelphia. I think that's probably a hit you have to take. I think buying in the CNA is too important not to do it. But Dak does value his private and is going to buy the 3 and buy it in. Unfortunately for him, it's just the Schuylkill. So, the least exciting private to buy in, but I don't fault him for doing it. Stock round 4, as in keeping with the rest of the game, gets a little sloppy. Submunch buying paying shares. JTT is going to sell below the safe threshold of the NYNH and then gets that company stolen by Dak. So not entirely sure why JTT sold there. I guess he was just looking for paying shares, but gets the company stolen and then actually is going to just sit on it. So it doesn't sell out to float the NYC, just sits on 40% of the NYNH. The B&O has access to green, realizes that they're still blocked by the private, so is going to work on getting into Lancaster. And buys a 3 so they don't fall back. NYNH lays the NYC home, has a single 2 train, and I'm kind of expecting in this scenario for Dak to shuffle all the assets out of the NYNH so that JTT is kind of forced to sell out. And then Dak can, just run the CNO and the NYNH for the rest of the game, but doesn't need to leave any assets in the NYNH. But instead, he's just going to run both companies as a good president. Working on getting over to Pittsburgh, still paying for 110. PRR gets into Lancaster and buys the 3, buys the private here. So didn't do it last time, but is going to do an OR 3.1 instead. Loses the private revenue, and we were worried about this Philadelphia track. She's given it to the B&O. So I don't know. Let's see. B&O says, I don't want it. Philadelphia and Trenton is upgradable, but he's going to upgrade Washington instead. Not even the Baltimore tile. Washington. I don't know. Runs 3 trains and pays it out. NYNH upgrading Albany. Tokens there. Pretty much have to token there as NYNH. It's uncommon that token anywhere else is worthwhile. Runs for 90. CNO is going to get into Pittsburgh, able to run all 3 trains now, and pays for 170. PRR does get the upgrade into Philadelphia, so it works out for them, but there was no guarantees that was going to happen. Runs for 110 and pays it out. We're into stock round 5. Only thing of note here is that we're going to see JTT sell out of the NYNH, and he's going to go back for the NYC. So that M&H exchange finally pays off for him in stock round 5. A lot of lost revenue there. Still sitting on his only private. We do see Heart of Dior also sitting on the private, the D&H. That's a little more understandable just because the PRR already bought on the CNA. But the rest of the stock round is just going to be JTT floating the NYC. So we're going to skip that into operating round 5. And we'll see the B&O upgrade its home. Still has 3 trains to run. So pretty good revenue. 190 pays it out. CNO should be upgrading Lancaster, does, and gets the token. So the track for the B&O is looking really bad. If you're going to lay this curve, you got to make sure you get this Philadelphia upgrade and miss their opportunity for that Washington upgrade instead. I'm going to keep criticizing that. CNO pays for 200. NYC is heading up towards the north. Not entirely clear what the purpose of that is. CPR is unfloated, but he does have the Champlain and St. Lawrence, so I think we're going to see them trying to get the CPR down south. Already lost the token in Albany, so really not the best run, but I think that's the thought process at least. Buys the 3, does not buy the 4. and does lay the track. So we will see the CPR float from him, it looks like. And still sitting on 2 trains. NYNH is laying towards their home, hoping to be able to run both trains, but that's a tall order. I have to assume we're going to see that 4 train come out. PRR just $100. Lays Reading in Allentown. Did have the number 2 track, but chooses not to lay it, but does get the straight track anyways to head north. Running for 130, and we're into 5.2. Not a whole lot else goes on in the rest of the operating round, so we're going to buzz through that quickly. We'll see some kind of negligible upgrades around New York. Still not an upgraded New York. We do see the 4 trains coming out. New York finally upgraded, running for 100. PRR just heading out west and withholding. We're into stock round 6. We're going to see the first couple players just buying paying shares, but then DAC does sell out to max float the Erie, and we will see, interestingly, Heart of Dior is going to end up taking the CPR, which is the company that we were saying JTT is just set up for a run into Albany. So after making all that effort to lay a track, doesn't actually end up getting the company. Rest of the stock round is not too exciting, and we'll go into the operating round. B&O is laying to try and get west into Pittsburgh, it looks like. We'll see if that works out for him. C&O heading up towards the Erie home, probably hoping to cooperate and get double token in Pittsburgh. NYNH, 2 trains, 2 runs, pretty good. Runs for 190. Erie's first operation is heading potentially towards Rochester, and it's going to buy one of the trains out of the NYNH, so not eager to buy the 4 trains and accelerate towards 5s. NYC heading over to Rochester as well, does have token money, so we'll have to see which of these companies gets there first. CPR's first operation is going to buy a 4 from the depot, and is shuffling a train out of the PRR, which is going to leave the PRR trainless. Unfortunately, unable to leave the PRR with enough money to buy the 4 and the 5. So the PRR just falls back for no reason. And the PRR is going to buy the last train from the depot. So, fell back just to open up 5s for the other players. That's a little bit unfortunate. B&O doesn't have money to buy the first 5, and is going to just withhold to prepare for a 6 probably. C&O also doesn't have money for the first 5, so even though the 5s are exposed, nobody's able to take advantage of them just yet, but lots of people withholding. We will see the NYNH here. Looks like they're hoping to block the Albany player from getting into Rochester since this track has already been laid. But they will be the first player to actually get a 5. So brown track's available. NYC realizes they're blocked out of Rochester, going to upgrade NYC, and tokens it even. I guess that's reasonable. This track could be upgraded for the PRR or the C&O to drop a token there. And we'll also buy a 5. Erie gets into Rochester, tokens it, so he's safe, and we'll pick up the third 5. So the question is, who's going to get the 6 train here? And could be the PRR. I don't know if they're going to have enough with just 1 withhold. Let's see. CPR running for just 50, no cash to lay any other track, so really just a terrible company as usual. PRR upgrading Philadelphia, does get into New York South, and is not going to token, runs for 210, which is going to be just shy of the 6 train. We're into stock round 7. We can again skip this. It's just buying, paying shares, nothing floats, and go into the operating round. B&O, withheld last time, does need a permanent train, is going to upgrade Baltimore, and it looks like they withhold again, so should have permanent train money now. We'll just see if they end up with a D or a 6. Regardless of what they get, their run is not good. So doesn't really matter which train they get other than potentially getting a cheaper one. NYNH running 2 trains again, has decent runs for 230 and is going to withhold. Dak is running three companies and does not have three permanent trains, so he's looking to somehow get a six. He's got the money for it. He just needs to shuffle trains around to make it happen. NYC upgrading Albany and is paying out for 210. C&O, one of Dak's companies, has pretty good runs, running for 170, which he withholds. Not enough for the six, but with a shuffle, is going to actually bring the six out in the Erie. So tokens in Pittsburgh, two of his companies in Pittsburgh. He's really just cutting the map up and starting to run away with things. We see the six come out. Bad news for Dior, who has two four trains and only one opportunity for a six train. So definitely going to be out of pocketing in a very expensive D, which is going to put her out of the game. CPR, still no cash, withholds, and is going to have to withhold again if they want to lay track. PRR, going to withhold for the D train upgrade, it looks like. So that's going to give the last six to Submunch, and that means that Heart of Dior is actually going to have to run or buy two D trains rather than a D and a six. NYC does get that track now that it's been upgraded, but too late to get into Rochester. B&O, way away from a D train, but because of the decision to upgrade, is going to get a six instead. And NYNH gets into Scranton. Scranton is expensive, but it will be upgraded and allow for the double run into New York. So we'll see if anybody grabs this Philadelphia track to shut down some of that run. C&O is going to upgrade Pittsburgh and runs for 250. Erie is heading down into Scranton. So all of Dak's companies are going to have at least access into New York, if not a double run, which looks like the NYNH should be able to get. CPR must have shuffled trains because it had $50, but is going to emergency buy a D train here, and I think we can safely say that she is eliminated now. Value is, yeah, about half of her nearest competitor and 1/3 of the leader. So no comeback possible there. D-Train in the PRR, who's going to upgrade Scranton. So this is a company that will be able to double run New York. Pretty good revenue, 350. Pays it out. And last operating round of this set. We will just watch the track develop here. No excitement there. Eventually Dak is going to get into Scranton, I'm sure. But for now, just working on the double O's. NYNH does link up for Erie to get into New York. Erie is going to upgrade so that the C&O also has access, although the C&O already had access. So really there's just a big loop for the C&O here. That's pretty good. Runs for 250. B&O, still really bad track. Needs to withhold to ever have hope of getting any runs anywhere else. But even with a withhold, I mean, you're going to lay this and then hope to get into Chicago maybe, or lay up here and hope someone lets you into Scranton, I guess. I don't know. Just really missed an opportunity on this Philadelphia tile. Sorry for harping on that. PRR has pretty good runs, as noted previously, and would have to withhold for a token, which is painful when you're running for 350. CPR running a D train for $50. Yeah, not good. Stock round 8. So let's look at the game state here. I think we can pretty safely call it. Elite Dak has a massive lead over all of his competitors, is ahead in shares, doesn't have D trains, but has good runs for his smaller trains. And it's going to be, I think, impossible for people to cut those. There could be a token in Philadelphia, but that's only going to deny a run into Lancaster. Scranton and New York both require 2 tokens, and the NYNH has already dropped their token, so that's one company that can't do it. And then Dak controls three companies in the area. Um, so, there's just no tokens around to cut his runs. Um, so yeah, we will just skip to the end here. The bank has a lot of money in it left, so this ends up going pretty long, but there's just no way for anybody to come back on Dak. You can see the track gets kind of crazy looking, but it's all for nothing. So Dak dominated this game. Um, there was really no chance for the other players. Um, and I think that just comes down to, sloppy play in the beginning. Dak played fine and other players didn't. So Dak is giving MP Coin a little bit of a run for their money in terms of the standings. We'll look at the leaderboard here and see that Dak and MP Coin are tied for first. MP Coin has the better win loss record, and it's only because MP Coin was a no show one week that he's tied. Otherwise, he'd be in solo first. But Dak is no slouch. He's won 3 out of the 5 games he's played. So, really impressive performance as well. So we will continue to monitor the tournament and or the league, I guess I should say, and see which of these players ends up coming out on top. The scoring of the league is a little bit funny in that players get a lot of points for just kind of being there or available. Um, so it is possible for other players to come back if they're selected to be an alternate. But I think that Dak and MP Coin have kind of set themselves apart in terms of their performance. So leaning towards one of these players being the winner of the entire thing. But it's still early, just week 5. So we will see if they're able to maintain this level of performance. Thanks for watching.